Okay, today I'm joined by Emma Burlow, who is the founder of the Lighthouse Sustainability Consultancy, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Revolution Zero, and the host of Straight Talking Sustainability podcast. Welcome to our podcast, Emma.
Thanks ever so much, Gareth.
So we'll dig into all of that in a minute, but I always start by asking guests, how did they get started in sustainability? Where did it all begin?
Oh, well, I've got to go back quite a long way. So I left school and went on a year out. So we're really going back a long way now, over 30 years. And during that year out, I went to Australia and I did some conservation work. And I grew up in a fairly kind of rural area. I was always into nature. And in my teenage years, I can remember having a couple of books about the rainforest and being very concerned about this amazing world that was out there. And then, I spent some time in Australia doing conservation work, as I say, and it really stemmed from there. I came back from that gap year and did an environmental science degree, and then sort of left my degree thinking, well, I could go and work with dolphins and turtles and, be an ecologist or something amazing, in the Welsh mountains or something. Or I could sort of see this problem with the rest of the world, like what everyone else was doing, not the very lovely, happy biologists and ecologists and conservationists. My dad was an engineer and ran his own small business, and it was really clear to me that he just didn't get it. And so I went into my first job, actually, was with a program some people might remember called EnviroWise, which was a government-funded program. So that was my first job out of uni. A brilliant team there. And back in the day, the government funded support for businesses to get their heads around things like the packaging waste regulations. Yeah. So that was mid-90s.
I was an EnviroWise advisor.
Oh, were you, Gareth?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So I was in the Southwest. So there's a few of us. Mark Shaler worked at that time as well, and Paul Gilbert and myself and others. So, so that was a really good grounding. It was literally a helpline. It was obviously pre-internet to what we know today. And people would ring up and say, how do I, I'm this business of X number of people and I've got these products. How do I comply with, these regulations, and what guidance is there? And so I cut my teeth in that area. And then really ever since then, so for the last 30 years, I've been working, advising and training, and as you said, consultancy to businesses around sustainability. So I've come up through kind of waste, recycling, circular economy, and now actually the main focus of my work is climate and carbon. It's all I've ever done, Gareth. That's the story.
As well as the EnviroWise, I see some other parallels there because I studied engineering, but I flirted with ecology for a bit, going on a butterfly expedition to Ecuador, but decided it wasn't really for me. And then had to find my way as an engineer into it.
Yeah, so, I think it's a really good synergy, engineering and sustainability, because it's about solving problems, right? So
absolutely. So you mentioned the circular economy there. This is a phrase which I think is much abused.
Yes. Yes.
But sort of tell us about what you did on the circular economy and how you would define the circular economy and what you...
Oh, goodness.
What lessons you learned on it.
So I guess, without wishing to sound too old, before we called it the circular economy, I worked on waste minimisation programmes and then resource efficiency programmes and industrial symbiosis programmes, right? And so at some point, and we all know, the definitions became the 9 R's or the 3 R's or the 10 R's or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's a good thing. It wrapped up all those forms of reuse, remanufacture, repair, etc., into a kind of fancy, almost a bit too theoretical kind of topic, which we now call circular economy. But for me, it doesn't, I haven't leaned in so much to the theory as I used to. Now it's all about what can we practically do to keep resources in use for longer. So for me, the definition of a circular economy is one where we keep resources in use for longer. We act a little bit more like nature. We cycle stuff. as opposed to what we tend to do, as people all know, as a linear economy, is take, make, use, dispose. It's really about taking and making and then keeping in a number, hopefully, of loops.
Yeah.
The bit I love about circularity or circular economy the most, and it's the economy bit, is each of those loops is a revenue creation opportunity and a job creation opportunity. And so that's where I like to work with businesses to say, well, okay, what's commercially viable for you? Not that community-led initiatives aren't valuable, they're brilliant. But again, I see this rub with no matter how many repair cafes we have and sharing, apps and whatever, we've still got this juggernaut of industry.
Yeah.
And so, trying to get circular business models. I spent a long time in my career working for WRAP and Zero Waste Scotland and others on circular economy business models, exactly that. And some of those have come to fruition now. So you've got ACS in Scotland on the clothing, doing clothing rental and assisting companies to do clothing leasing and rental and repair. And then, of course, we know now about lots of sharing models. Even Uber is a circular business model if you take it far enough. Most electric cars now are sold on a lease.
Yeah.
Lots of us have contracts for mobile phones. Those are all circular business models. So, I love it really, but I kind of consider it just as normal life.
Yeah.
Which, sadly, a lot of people still don't.
Well, you're the first guest ever to use the phrase industrial symbiosis, which happens to be one of my favourite topics.
Gareth! We
20 years ago,
years.
22 years ago, I launched Tees Valley Industrial Symbiosis Project, which eventually became part of the National Industrial Symbiosis Project.
NISP.
Yes, we had a couple of years. So for anybody who doesn't know, this is the idea of one person's waste, person being industry, becoming another's raw material. And we diverted hundreds of thousands of tons of material from...
it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. But it takes a bit of thinking.
Yes, it does. And one of my earliest jobs after Enviro was actually I went to London. I worked for one of the very first waste, it was called Waste Alert. It was a waste minimisation club. They were all over the country at the time. And it's sort of sad to see, a lot of that stuff was funded or had government funding or then went to European funding, that sort of thing. And it was very hard to self-sustain. And I know NISP tried a commercial model, didn't they, after?
Yeah.
So it sort of, I don't know how you find it, Gareth, but it's sometimes frustrating for those of us who have been through this loop a few times to now see that we're still struggling with the same things. And it's like there's been so much learning and so much knowledge and so much good practice. And now quite often I feel like we're starting from the scratch again. Yeah.
Well, we looked at commercial models or trying to persuade people to share some of the economic benefits, but it just became it just put up the barriers because we saw ourselves as sort of matchmakers, and just starting those conversations off. But sometimes, I remember one company was paying something like £1 million for disposing of plastic offcuts, and we found somebody who'd pay them £250,000, so they were net up £1.25 million.
Wow.
And we never got a Christmas card.
Not a bottle of whiskey or anything. I did some similar work in Avonmouth, so the port of Avonmouth, it's a huge industrial area. And, it's a really, you often have to start with mapping, don't you? Like, where even is the stuff? Like, we don't even know where the stuff is, right? It sounds obvious, and most of the waste from Avonmouth, the resources from Avonmouth were leaving the area and travelling miles to be recovered, even recovered for energy, but recycled. And so even that simple piece of work just showed that there was so much opportunity in an area like a port. And I know the ports, I think it's either Rotterdam or Amsterdam have done a lot of work on this.
Yeah.
In terms of sort of making use of the resources that are there. But yes, it seems to get dwarfed by the dominant business model, which is just go and buy stuff as cheaply as you can from wherever you can, make stuff as quickly as you can and cheaply as you can, and sell it as quick as you can. And that I said that quickly for a reason. It's all jammed into time pressure. And if you've got to spend a little bit more time finding a resource down the road or recycled content or something, it often gets pushed to the wall, doesn't it?
You got another brownie point there for correcting yourself from waste to resource, because
oh yeah, definitely.
Because when we first got started, it took a while to warm people up. We were running workshops to try and get people to think differently, and I jokingly banned the word waste. I called it the W word, and it became a joke that if anybody used the word waste, everybody would suck through their teeth and say, you can't say that. But that's when the creativity started.
Yeah.
So I think it was a psychological trigger.
What is waste anyway? I mean, waste is only waste because someone put it in a bin bag, right? A black bin bag, so you can't see what's in the bin bag. I sometimes say that the black bin bag was probably, the chief villain in all this. Maybe the skip is the industrial equivalent. Once you put it in there, forget about it, Yes. So I absolutely agree. I'd like to ban the word recycling next, because I think that similarly skews people's thinking. So if they think if they can recycle it, that's the end of the story.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of the to me, it's the wrong end of the loop. We should be thinking about sustainable raw materials.
It's totally the wrong end of the loop. It's it's nigh on a treatment method, really, and particularly if you're taking. I saw something on LinkedIn this week, and Gareth, I know that we connect on LinkedIn, and I tend to be I'd like to say I'm the voice of reason, but usually actually I'm just the voice of antagonism. But I seem to see things differently to some people. So people were saying how wonderful it was that you could take your small, hard to recycle plastics back to Boots, right? And they gave you a voucher to spend more money in Boots, funny enough, right? But it's little tiny bits. It might be these little travel toothpaste tube or a little cap of something or whatever, right? And to me, it's such a false economy to be collecting all those little bits and putting them all up. Anyway, I think they get made into lumber. They go to a company to get made into something. But imagine the transport and the resource and all the rest of it that goes into that. But what is essentially, in my view, the wrong end of the scale. Yeah.
Well, if they were making toothpaste caps back into toothpaste caps, I would be happy.
Yeah, but they're not. It's all low grade stuff. So
yeah.
But then, the argument pushed back was, well, it's better than nothing.
Yeah.
But that is how low that bar is. We're on the better than nothing bar. Yeah.
Yeah. At Lighthouse, I think the first thing you list on your services is carbon literacy training.
Yeah.
This is what I thought we could delve deeply into.
Go for it.
Today. Because I don't do carbon literacy training, and I have my views, which are probably due to being an outsider, not fully understanding it. So I'll let you start. What is carbon literacy training, and who is it?
Well, first of all, I train businesses, okay? But carbon literacy is open to everybody. So you can train in schools, you can train local authorities, you can train. I was on a community course last night. Someone else was running. So you can train anybody, right? So the premise is that we need to have a foundation knowledge of anything, but it's essentially carbon, climate, to be able to move forward, to have the motivation and the ability to take action. So set up by Dave Coleman and Phil Corbell about 12 years ago in Manchester. It's a charity, and from a sort of really slow start, it's now sort of growing exponentially in terms of training about 10 to 12,000 people a month now. So we're well over the 100,000 and 120,000 mark. And really it's in businesses, it's to try to fill that gap between, we've got a net zero plan or a strategy or a target, and we've got a load of people going about their daily work. Mm-hmm. And then we've got a struggling sustainability person, usually trying to wave a flag every now and then on a webinar or something, right? Trying to be heard.
Yeah.
So what I do is we go in and deliver, and it's a day's worth of training. So it's quite significant, but we tend to break it up into 2 or 3 sessions. And we work through the climate science in its most basic forms. We work through the impacts of climate change. Some of this stuff people have already seen, but they've got questions about, or they might have seen misinformation about.
Yeah.
Then we go on to the kind of the impacts of that on your business. What's the risks? Things like the extreme weather, but also things like insurance, or, you've got a warehouse somewhere that's going to flood or can't get your people to work or whatever. And then we work on employee engagement. How do you use your influence internally? Where are the main buckets of carbon? So we work through, what is the carbon footprint, scope 1, 2, and 3, some of the terminology that they are going to need to understand in the coming months and years.
Yeah.
And this, one of the sayings I love is every job's a climate job. So my goal by the end of the day is that they know that just like health and safety, just like diversity and inclusion, climate is now part of their job.
Yeah.
Even if it's not explicitly written. Because if they work in finance, they might be asked for figures. If they work in HR, they might be asked about the car policy or transport. If they work in, events, they might be asked about food or venues or whatever. If they work in operations, it just goes on and on and on. And if you look at scope 3, obviously that's the whole business and the supply chain and the customer end. So actually everyone in the business has a role. So we come away after those 2 or 3 sessions, hopefully, and usually I have to say it's been really impactful, with people who suddenly go, I get it now.
Yeah.
And Gareth, it's been the most rewarding and impactful thing I've ever done in my whole career.
Oh, fantastic.
Honestly.
The reason, or one of the reasons why I've sort of avoided it a little bit, is that, when I've tried to do training on climate science, we kind of, it's immensely complex topic.
Can be, yeah.
And to get that, which is a quarter of a day or half a day on the science, whatever it might be, is there a risk of giving people almost enough information to confuse them, but not really bottom out all those topics?
So what's that? There's a little bit of information is dangerous or something?
Yeah.
Possibly. But what I've found, and because I've trained a lot now, I've trained over 1,000 people, and I guess you get to in a rhythm of what people need to know and what they probably don't need to know, what continually confuses people and what sinks in. And now I've really boiled it down to what is it they need to know? What are the key messages? Because all we're trying to do is reach that point of, sadly, apathy, but more commonly inaction. But everyone knows climate change is happening, right? And I talk about this on my podcast. It's actually really rare to meet climate deniers.
Yeah.
But you meet climate kind of skeptics, and you meet people who actually are quite concerned about it, but haven't got a clue what to do. Mm-hmm. And never mind in their business, but at home as well. So I boil the climate science, Gareth, down to it's happening. We have scientific consensus, right? We don't need to debate that anymore. So we talk about that. We talk about the history of how we know. So how did we get to this point? So we talk about the Keeling curve and then the ice core data, which you can find on any sort of David Attenborough video, right? Yeah. But it's explaining to people that's how we know.
Yeah.
Just as night turns into day, right? CO2 is a warming gas. It's man-made. And we know that, these gases, they reflect heat just because of their molecular state. That's as basic as we go. Greenhouse effect, which most people have done at school.
Yeah.
Carbon cycle, which again, most people can vaguely remember about photosynthesis. And that's it. And then we kind of cap it off with, it's happening, it's urgent, it's man-made. I guess, we're part of the problem.
Yeah.
We go a lot more into kind of the China question, it's not us, it's China. And I try to work through all of these little, they're not so little, all of these barriers that people put up.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's quite challenging for some people, particularly who either don't have science background or it's a million years since they did it at school, to come back to that. But it is only, as you say, hour and a half.
Yeah.
Something 2 hours.
So you say you rarely get anybody who tries to take you on.
I've had one.
You've had one out of 1,000. I suppose that's not bad.
Well, sometimes maybe they keep quiet, but I've had one who really did take me on.
And the misinformation, obviously. I did a workshop recently for some very senior people, and one of them cited the Heathrow blackout, which was absolutely nothing to do with climate change whatsoever. But the Telegraph found a quote expert who liked to think it was, or was willing to get their name in the paper to say it was, on the basis of no evidence. So, but do you find yourself getting bogged down in that, or does generally
you do get that
the session move
which
on?
I guess is different to denial of climate change, right? Denial of climate change is a fairly serious affliction. and it's really hard, and I always say to people, just don't bother, just don't go there, because that's a bit like saying, that's not a chair, it's a giraffe. You just can't equate. So I've only had one very difficult person who I actually said, can we have a chat afterwards, because he was a little bit disruptive and sort of putting things in a chat, and I said, look, it's important that people know that there's another view, but this is what we're here for. I'm paid as a trainer to give you this knowledge, So I've only sort of had to pull rank once, which was a bit uncomfortable at the time. But normally it's more common, and you get it with things like EV batteries.
Yeah.
You get it with things like wind turbines kill loads of birds. Yeah. You get it with, even like, why don't we go back to mining coal again? The sort of Nigel Farage kind of tropes. But I think what I've learned to do is, and again I have learnt this over the years, rather than have those individual battles, I kind of say, well, that's interesting. What makes you think that? And then we sort of go through. Like the EV battery one was interesting recently. Someone said, well, we're just going to end up with mountains of EV batteries. We're going to be drowning in them. Yeah. And I sort of said, well, what makes you think we would do that? Like, why would industry allow lots of critical raw materials that they need, expensive raw materials, just to sit around in?
Yeah. Yes,
and they were like, well, I said, well, do you think we might develop the technology to, and in fact we already have developed the technology, do you think? And they were like, oh yeah, never really thought of it like that. Yeah. So throwing it back to them sometimes, Gareth, is to say, and if the room gets a bit on it, we sort of say, do we all accept that there's misinformation, not just about climate change, but about everything? Yeah. And then they go, oh yeah, be careful what you read.
Yeah. And, Yeah, I got that, the EV battery one, at a family social event, and had to bite my lip because
that's even worse.
There was a definite Dunning-Kruger effect going on. This idea that the people who know least about a topic tend to have the strongest opinions about it.
There is that,
or the most confidence in those opinions.
I mean, the people who come on my course, Gareth, generally, and it's not always the case. I mean, I'd say at least 60 or 70% self-select. Yeah. So I'm completely conscious that I have an interested audience, but I also train people who it's a 3-line whip, and they just have to be there. Yeah. And the most common thing people say to me is not that I don't believe it or I don't think we should do anything, is that I've never really thought about it. Yeah. That's what people say. They've got busy lives. They don't think it's their problem. They don't feel empowered to do anything. And so therefore they just block it out.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned was some people have studied it at school. And I've become quite interested recently in the age profiles in this. At the risk of being accused of being ageist, the polling suggests that if you look at pro and against net zero policies, the only age group that's really against, and they're not overall against, but the strongly for and the strongly against balance out, is the over 65s. And I sometimes think, well, I was 18 when Margaret Thatcher was the first ever national leader to give a major speech on climate change at the UN. Yeah. A much missed fact. Yeah. It's a good pub quiz question, that.
Yeah, she's a chemist. That's
yes.
Why. Yeah, so we don't have very many scientists in Parliament. She was a chemist, yeah.
But it's a good way to push back on, people who
isn't it?
Saying, well, it was Margaret Thatcher who started the IPCC and all the rest of it, or triggered the start of it.
Yeah, good point. I'm going to use that one, Gareth.
But I sometimes think that, I was 18 when climate science came from the lab out into the political world. And I suppose in the US, James Hansen had given his speech to Congress a year before. So I was still in my learning, I was about to go to university. I was still in my learning process. Yeah. Although I don't think I fully got climate science until the Earth Summit in 92 when I was at university. So I think my brain was still in the learning phase.
Yeah.
And I sometimes think a lot of this climate skepticism or lukewarmism comes from people who didn't grow up with it.
Yeah,
so I don't know. That's a very long, waffly way of asking the question. Do you feel there's an age profile? Do younger people take climate change as read and that we need to do something about it?
On the whole, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about my parents as well. My dad's always been a bit of a climate skeptic. I think he's coming round to the idea now. He's 82. I mean, goodness, only been 50 years of me trying, But anyway, I sort of gave up trying. I think you're right. I think they maybe didn't get that. There's also definitely a kind of, I'll say definitely, in my view, a kind of post-war, we need to build the economy thing that still sits with that generation. And it, I can't say because I wasn't there, but it must have been such a trauma and such a shock. I mean, both of my families come from very sort of impacted working class backgrounds, and shipbuilding and agriculture and then engineering. It's just all that, they both emigrated for work and all those things. So I think it's really traumatic to then, I don't know, for whatever reason, feel like you're being told to pull back, to have your lifestyle restricted in some way. So that's the narrative that I really dislike, is that this is going to be a tax, that this is going to harm you. And so I think that, they came through that era of, if we work hard, we will do well, and we can have not what we want, but we can have a better lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that almost moves into a slight bit of entitlement.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately I do hear. But obviously I don't train that many people in that bracket because they've left work post 65. So I get the sort of tail end of it. But actually most people I train are very concerned. I'm getting a really worrying feel from the younger people. And so I guess they would be mid-20s to 30, 25 to 35, saying that we're considering not even having children. And I know that sounds alarmist, but I've heard it at least 4 or 5 times now.
Yeah.
And I heard Jonathan Porritt say the same thing in a talk recently. Now, I've heard it firsthand, so I'm not picking it up from anyone else. And in one case, that an older lady on the course was really emotional about it because she'd heard one of her colleagues say that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting quite, in the younger generation, it's not only cost of living and all the rest of it, the reasons why they might choose not to have children, but they're a bit like, well, what are we bringing them into?
Yeah. That sometimes worries me as well, because then you go to the other end, which is what's the point?
That's it. It's really worrying. It's really worrying.
Sort of monster running, running up the street behind you. What's the point in running away from it? Or
it's fear. I mean, the root of it is a fear. There's a fear, and that is, I find that both difficult in my job, but also a privilege to kind of hold that space for people in what is can be quite a thought-provoking half day.
Yeah. But going on to the end of the course, from what I've seen of the structure, and I did have a bit of a look before inviting you on to make sure I knew a little bit.
You have to hop on a course, Gareth, if you don't.
was a very sensible thing, which is asking people to commit to one thing that they're going to do as a result of learning all this. But is there there sometimes feels like and again, this is sometimes the reason why I steer away from climate impact before I'm trying to get people to do things. Is there a disconnect between, we've got this existential risk and we want you to switch your lights off or power down your PC or, eat vegetarian once a week? Do you find that disconnect comes up?
Yeah, of course. But that disconnect is what paralyzes us, And there's the pledges, you make an individual pledge and a group pledge. So something you can do off your own back, which might be, I'm going to get the bus twice a week, or I might get, I'm going to make sure my team go on this training course or whatever. You pledge to do something, and then you pledge to do something as a group, which means you can't do it on your own. So that might be something like get a policy changed at work, or make a suggestion that something happens to the, I don't know, we have vegetarian catering or something. And there's a clause in there that says that it must be significant. So if you put in a pledge to say, I'll turn my lights off, or, power down my laptop, they'll turn it round. They'll say that's not significant enough, because they know your job role. And although you can't really make assumptions, so if you're the head of, head of commercials, and you come back and say, oh, I'm going to double side print, they'll turn that around, so that won't pass. So there's definitely and I push my learners very much towards where do you have influence, not where can you trim your own fat,
Yeah.
And, I work with companies with 1,000, 10,000. Our biggest client's got 40,000 employees. Mm. So if they change something on a procurement document, on a, how they write their business cases, on a how they structure, so one of the pledges that came back from our largest client was about how they cost in for extreme weather events.
Yeah.
Right, so those are massive, the implications of those are massive. So it's trying to move people actually from the tiny little twiddles to using their voice to say, well, actually, if I just spoke up a bit and make this happen, the ramifications potentially are quite big.
Yeah. And it's connected, that one task is connected back to their job role usually, is that?
Yeah, it has to be, because it's a work-based course. Yeah. Very occasionally we get people to say that, I haven't got any agency at work, or I've only just started or something. Can I do something? People do stuff in their scout group or their church or their PTA or whatever. And again, I met a chap who said, look, I'm a volunteer in a charity, but we've got a network of 800 people, maybe I could have more impact there. Absolutely. So it's very impact driven, but you do have to work quite hard at that, because people do default to, oh, I'll have meat-free Monday, or, so we work quite hard throughout the course. And that's the mindset shift, actually.
Yeah.
That it isn't just about, individual choices are important, right? But I've done loads of stuff on my own carbon footprint, and I still can't budget below, it's about 7 tons at the moment. Yeah. I haven't got an EV yet, and I don't fly. I'll be flying this year for the first time in years. So that's really hard to expect people to do that.
That's funny. A colleague of mine was feeling guilty for flying the first time in 6 years, and I said, after 6 years, I think you're allowed.
You're allowed. Yeah. Well, that's how I'm taking the kids away this long haul this summer, and it's the first time I've gone long haul for. That'll be 5, 6 years. And it's not only climate reasons, it's lots of reasons, but it's difficult. I think when you meet people with a very high carbon footprint, obviously individual choices will make quite a big difference to them. But when you meet people who are already doing quite a lot, it's about taking them to a next. I talk about confidence a lot, so it's about them having the confidence to just bring it up somewhere in a new environment. And that, to be honest, is the most exciting part, because you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And all sorts of things have happened.
Yeah.
It's like kicking the door open, and I feel like I'm giving people permission.
Yeah.
And they quite often email me back and go, oh, since your course, I've done this, that and the other. Thank you so much. You gave me the confidence to do this. And it's all in there, Gareth. People are worried about it. They just don't have permission or confidence to do anything, because they're worried about getting moaned at by the people that we've just described.
But there's also that thing you were talking about, if something's policy, it tends to stay policy forever. Yes. And it's quite hard to change policies, and the business as usual has this incredible resilience, because a lot of people just assume that's the only way it can be done because it's the way it's always been done. So I think, if you're inspiring people to, you mentioned tweaking the procurement process. I think that's particularly
just asking the question.
Yeah.
And just what's the beauty of carbon literacy for me is about critical mass. So it's no good. This is what I mean about the Lone Ranger, the sustainability person. They are on a hiding to nothing, and I love them. They do a great job. But if you've got 10,000 staff and 3 sustainability people, right? But what you need out of that 10,000 staff is 1,000 of them, say 10%, who might be in a room at any one point in time, or 2 of them might be in a room at any one point in time. And then the conversation will come up, and then they'll be basically your army doing your bits for you. So for me, it was about getting enough people in a room so that it can't be, it's a bit like having votes on a council or something, isn't it? Yeah. Like, you need to be in the room and you need enough people to say, actually, I think that's important. Can we look at that?
Yeah.
For it, because otherwise, like you say, business as usual just dominates, and businesses are on rails, and it's hard. I do get lots of not pushback. I get lots of quite challenging conversations with people who say, well, Emma, I've listened to what you've said, but my role in the business is to sell stuff, and actually most people's job in business is to sell stuff and make more money, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot. You've got to go through that whole mindset shift of, that is your job, but how are you going to do it in an environment, in a market which now requires you to be low carbon?
Absolutely. I think you've have
I changed your mind, Gareth?
Well, I wasn't anti, but as I say, it was just something that having sort of got a little bit bogged down a couple of times in it. Yes. I tend to take the science as read.
Yes.
And even,
well, so do I. I mean, I don't take any.
Work a bit more what's in it for me, of starting of why should your organization take climate or sustainability seriously, and not get into the science, and just start with the commercial business case for doing so.
I get that too.
Yeah.
I get that too. And let's just say that, everything I've talked about today is my way of doing carbon literacy, and that there are 800 odd other trainers doing it their own way. Yeah. But everyone, it's a requirement of the course that you have to cover the science. And I think that is because if you don't have that basic knowledge, there's always a seed of doubt. Yeah. And there's always but I don't really, is it the ozone layer? Is it something to do with that? Like, and I get those sorts of questions all the time. People don't have fundamental scientific knowledge as a whole.
Yeah.
And so just telling them, again, giving them permission to say, we have scientific consensus, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to understand it. Just as you trust your doctor, you can trust climate science.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, oh, thanks. Okay, don't have to think about that anymore.
Yeah. So you're also Chief Sustainability Officer for a company called Revolution Zero.
I am.
Which sounds interesting. I've only had a quick look at their website, but tell us about what Revolution Zero do.
And that's been a fascinating journey. So back to the circular economy conversation, really. There's a big climate benefit as well. But so I met Tom, the founder, about 4 years ago. Tom Dawson set out to, during COVID, obviously the mask issue was massive in the NHS. PPE was a massive problem in the NHS. It's now come full circle, hasn't it, with all the investigations and stuff. But at the time, that was a critical problem. And Tom's a clinical doctor in his previous life and now an entrepreneur. And so he set up to try to help resolve that problem with by moving away from disposables to reusable medical textiles.
Yeah.
Now, all hospitals used to do that anyway, right? But the days of laundries and all the rest of it, costs being driven down, it then became cheaper per item to buy the PPE, from abroad, etc., etc. So he was really trying to disrupt that very, very dominant industry. He brought me on board to help build the circular business model. So we built it from scratch around circularity. And I've been with him ever since. I sit on the board, I'm a director, and I'm actually chairing the board at the moment because we've had a change of chair. So I'm sort of caretaking. It's working with the NHS, but also now branching out to private healthcare, veterinary, dentistry, anyone who uses gowns, drapes, hats, they call them theatre kits. So when you go and have an operation, there's a big bundle of stuff that they lay all over the place and lay all over you, etc., etc. So it's quite specialist, and there's a lot of quality assurance and infection control and certification that goes behind it. So certainly a lot more complicated than a reusable coffee cup.
Yeah. So is it selling a service rather than a product then?
Both, actually. So we partner with textile producers to provide the product, but we also provide what we call these laundry pods, which are mobile, pretty much like, well, in a container kind of unit, because a lot of hospitals have lost their laundries. So again, they're getting, how do I say it, shafted by laundry companies to do their laundry. A lot of stuff goes missing. There's these big frameworks, sort of multi-million-pound contracts. They've lost that autonomy.
Yeah.
So where hospitals, so we're working with Devon and Cornwall Trust, they want to bring that back in-house. Of course, they're never going to be able to find the money to build another laundry. So we're doing these pods. They're like a clean room. They're all up to spec. And that's a service that we can sell then, which then starts to really reap benefits financially. Because before that, they were buying disposables there, paying for the waste there, having some other linens. Because obviously you've still got to wash the linens, like the bed linen and stuff.
Yeah.
Doing that there, it's all over the place, a real mess. And also not able to really do anything bespoke. So, we can do things bespoke, almost down to orthopedics will want different stuff to, ear, nose and throat or whoever. It's very specialist, and that's where Tom's clinical knowledge comes in handy. But we've got a great team. We've got really good reach across the healthcare sector. Really want this.
Yeah.
It's just, as you know, Gareth, an uphill struggle fighting against the dominant business model.
Yeah, it's interesting though that Tom's a former doctor. Cause I do a lot of work in the health sector myself, and it always pleasantly surprises me that people who are sometimes at the right sharp end of saving people's lives are so dedicated to a very, very long-term issue.
Totally.
Yeah.
Almost.
But it does seem to be the buy-in. I always thought it would be difficult, but it's usually you're pushing at an open door. Usually,
the barriers, if you like, are with the complexity of the procurement system.
Yeah.
I think if most consultants had their way, they would do this overnight. But they've got a waiting list out, longer than their arm, and in the meantime, it's a bit like changing policy. They know it's going to take 12, 18 months to get through. So that's where we as a small business, that's where we really find a challenge. The long tail of sales, if you like, is tough. Working with the NHS, as you will know, is hard work.
Yeah. And what do you do as CSO?
Yeah. So I look after anything to do with with circularity in terms of how the model functions. So any decisions that have to be made around trying to stay on track. So we could make shortcuts, and we could, we can't get that, should we just do that disposable? Or we can't do that, should we just not, whatever. But so it's trying to keep us very, very centred on that. So I get a lot of questions from the team about, staying on the circular. What should we do, Emma? What's the best option to do? But I also look after the B Corp. So Revolution Zero is a B Corp, same as Lighthouse is now. So I look after that. For the NHS, we have to do something called an evergreen assessment. So that's a carbon reduction plan. I pretty much look after anything sustainability minded comes to me. Tom is exceptionally sustainability minded as well, and has a really, really excellent grasp of circular economy. But of course, he's trying to run the business, so we sort of double hand that. But he talks on circularity all the time on the kind of speaking circuit, and he does work with Exeter University, which is kind of renowned for its circularity. On the research side. Yeah. So there's R&D as well. It's one of these tricky things. You can't sort of just set up the business and sell stuff. It's like, all the time having to prove the case, all the time having to do the white papers, having to, define your space before you can even sell into it. So yeah, a real challenge, but one I love being involved in, because I can see that it's a pure circular business, and that its intentions are good, and that if we crack it, it will it will save the NHS millions of pounds, and also going back to the impact, millions of tons of carbon and tons of waste avoided as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and we were talking about industrial symbiosis before. Product service system is another one of my favorite topics. But it's interesting because those product service systems seem to be easy to sell in certain sectors, but more difficult in others. And a lot of it seems to come down to the mindset of the user. I had to assess some research once on this, and there was a wonderful example of compressed air services. So instead of selling an industry compressor, they would provide a compressor and set it up and charge per unit energy rather than anything else, and save, because air compressors are huge. Going back to the Envirowise days, I know we weren't meant to do too much in energy, but we would always see them from the air compressors. But they couldn't sell them in the UK because, whereas it's popular in Australia and France, apparently it's because the UK companies like to own the compressor. They like to have an asset.
It'll come down to that.
It's on their balance sheet, and it's like, well, no, but that's costing you huge amounts of money compared to the service.
And I've had exactly the same discussion around leasing before. No, we like to buy the asset, but leasing, you don't have to maintain it. You can, trade it in. You can get the late everything. But yeah, exactly that. It's a lot of it is and this is, again, every job's a climate job, or every job's a resource job, because it's down to finance and no one else to restructure those business cases. Now, if they don't get it, I'm not saying a carbon literacy course would change that, but if they fundamentally don't get it or don't think it's their job, that is really hard. I mean, the door is just shut. So yeah, that's the same in procurement for medical textiles. Often, we've got a small amount of money. What can we buy? The disposables are this much. The reusables are that much. Obviously, because there's a longer tail for the return. We haven't got the money. We have to buy the cheap ones. So quality goes out the window. You've got poor old medical professionals wearing those horrible plastic aprons, which they hate. All sorts of win-wins come from a high quality, laundered, even labelled with your name on sort of garment, you're the right size, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, it's difficult sometimes to get that through procurement or finance.
I listed 3 things in the introduction, and the third of those was you host the Straight Talking Sustainability podcast.
I do.
So give us the elevator pitch for the podcast.
Yeah, well, this is how I got in touch with you, Gareth, because I'm always looking at other podcasts to sort of learn from and get ideas. So I decided to do something. It was my 30th year in the sector, and I thought, what am I going to do? And I thought, I'm never going to get around to writing a book. I never stop still long enough. But I thought a podcast was a way of reaching out to people and sharing some of my learning, just as you've done, Gareth, because I really firmly believe that we have most of the knowledge, or at least a lot of it. The issues we've got, you've just touched on it, are usually mindset shift, or people feeling like it's not their job, or haven't got time, or whatever. So I felt like I had a mine of information, and also that I know a lot of people who've got mines of information that we should just be sharing, just to give people who are in the sector and who are maybe you can't find experience on the internet. So maybe by listening to someone who says, I've got your back, I know how you're feeling, I've been through this problem, why don't you try this? Come back and tell me how you got on. So the whole idea was sort of 3 S's: keep it simple, make it stick. So again, it has to be an action that actually, even if it's a tiny action, an action that actually sticks, and share it.
Yeah.
So that was November last year, and it's a weekly podcast. I have a guest one week and then a solo episode the following week. And yeah, it's available for people to listen to wherever they get their podcast.
On all popular platforms.
Yeah, straight talking sustainability. Try and keep it straight. No bells and whistles. Not too complicated. Just things that people want to talk about.
Fantastic. And we're nearly out of time. So I suppose my final question is, what's your favorite piece of advice you like to give people on delivering sustainability?
Wow. I think this has changed over the years. And I think now one of my favourite bits of advice is to listen rather than tell. And we're starting to talk more about meeting people where they are, and I get that. So less of the preach and you need to do this, you need to do that, and more of the kind of, what's your problem today and how can we solve it? And I've found, particularly through my training, that the less I train and the more I let people speak, the more happens in that room.
Yeah.
And you're just a guide, just a sort of facilitator. Obviously, you've got to give some basic knowledge, but then you sort of try to untap what they're thinking in their own head. So yeah, I think be curious. And I would have probably before said be brave and be bold and like go for it. And now I'm kind of just be curious, but put yourself into positions, into rooms that you maybe wouldn't go into before. Because when you remove that kind of, I'm trying to convince people thing, you just like, I'm just going to go there to listen. Mm-hmm. You can then sort of almost quietly or surreptitiously throw in the conversation, and you're not met with any resistance because you're not there trying to tell. So yeah, move from tell to convince. In fact, my podcast this week is called "I'm not trying to." Gosh, I should know this. I'm not recruiting for a cult. Because I think I was trying to convince people for too many years. Mm-hmm. So yeah, put your listening cap on, listen to what they say, and you'll find a way in then. I promise.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that. I think we've covered a huge amount of ground.
We have. It's been great. Thank you.
So thank you for joining us and sharing all that information. I hope people are listening.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Gareth.
Cheers.